Okay. There are, I've done a number of rants and things. There are a number of topics that I want to discuss that honestly I kind of shy away from, not so much because of um, the knowledge that I'm going to get some backlash on them, because I'm not really sure that my off-the-cuff ranting style is going to properly express what, my stance is on it. I can think of quite a few, actually, where there's this sort of fear, am I going to come off as a Neanderthal? And, that's fine. But there is a certain level of that where I feel like what I want to say is not necessarily going to be what's going to come out. But I'm going to give a shot on this one because I ran across this wonderful thing in a magazine that is handed out for free. And there's a cute little picture of a tampon with googly eyes, which is just awesome. But it brought me to the idea, and much of it's basically about, hey, what about transgendered people who, either menstruate or not, but it has no relationship to their gender. And it really kind of highlighted the problem that I see with this whole concept of transgender. Now, to some extent, I have what I think is a fairly liberal-sided view of what gender is. It's purely a social construct. It means nothing at all. Yet, the same people who often say those kind of things, I think, my connection to the whole, I don't know what you want to call it, but some people will call it social justice warriors, but some people, I don't know if that's a derogatory term. I know that originally it was kind of taken up by the people who, are accused of it now, but, the Nazis took their name first, and you wouldn't want to be called a Nazi, so even if you, basically, I'm not saying it's the same situation, but terms can move away from at least the intended, whether or not they were intended to be derogatory during the course of something. So we're not going to really delve into that particularly, but there is certainly a group which supports these gender equity type issues and such not. And unfortunately, the people who seem to, I think, make the statement that gender is just a social construct also seem to put way too much stock on it, if that's all the fuck it is, okay? Language is also a social construct and should be given approximately an equivalent level of respect as gender should. And the question there comes between, how much are we willing to bend our language in order to favor some other way of interpreting a different social construct? And I'm not sure where that balance is. But let me spell out what my feelings on this all are. Because, especially living here in Eugene, where it's a more liberal area than Phoenix was by far, and there's a healthier transgender community. There's less, I think, animosity towards that kind of a person who associates themselves in that way. There's, if anything, probably more of a crackdown on anyone who doesn't buy into, and I'm going to call it SJW, but I don't really know if that's the proper term for it. But that's what, all the right-wingers, I don't know if that's the proper term for them either, want to label this kind of shit with, right? Okay. So there are a few key issues at play here. If gender is just a social construct, and it's nothing more than that, well, I'll tell you what sex isn't, okay? Sex is not necessarily a binary thing, but it is also not simply a social construct. There is a physical underlying reality there, if you believe in physical underlying realities to anything, right? There are definitely cases where sex is not a simple binary choice. For example, the XXY chromosome set is not really properly male or female. Pathological, but but also there are people who are born with genitals from both sexes, and that clearly is an issue that's not doesn't fit into that binary mold very well, and that's fine. Those cases especially, I think, are fairly rare, although I have to be honest, I don't think that there's a significant amount of study and record keeping on that, so they could be far more common than we think, but they're still, maybe well under 1%, I would assume. It's just a question of how absolutely rare are these, or are they, common? And clearly the number of transgendered people we have, especially in today's society, is much, much larger than the percentage of people who are found requiring an operation for gender determination at birth. Well, not for gender, for sexual determination at birth. And the point that's important here is whatever you want to say about gender roles, they were a secondary derived attribute from the physical, sexual, I'm not going to say identity, that's not the right word, but I'm not sure what is the right word. You don't talk about like inanimate objects having an identity, but I'm trying to think what there's a discrimination, a categorization into two sexes with maybe a shaded area in between that's very, very small. Gender was largely historically based on that physical and physiological sex. We always had the same words to handle the two. And I can understand where the use of words that are associated with both of these things, if you, for example, he or she, if you choose or find yourself in a situation where your identity, you see, it's so difficult for me because I use the wrong word. Choose is obviously not the right word from the standpoint of the people who identify as trans, but I'm not sure. You see, if gender's a social construct and not a physiological thing at all, and it seems obvious that it is, well, then choose seems more reasonable or find themselves aligned with a certain gender role more than another. So, for example, if you had a society that had no gender distinctions whatsoever, right? And I'm not sure how you could do this, but if you had one, if, for example, our physical equipment was a little different, well, what would we call associating with these different roles to be? I don't know, and would it matter if it's permanent or if it's something that you can move from one to the other, if you can be gender fluid or whatever? And again, I don't know. You don't have the ability to change your physicality as easily, right? To one level or another, genetically, you're probably male or female. Whatever equipment you have installed, at any given point. If you've gone through some transition, that becomes a more questionable thing. Are we worried about genetical as your sex determination, or does it have to do with the physical parts you have, or is it some combination which by changing them in today's largely, I know this is changing quick, but in the technology of say 10 years ago at the very least, and probably still in today's technology, more or less is a matter of you are no longer functionally capable of performing as a sexually active creature, capable of reproducing. If you've been, if you've gone through some sort of transsexual operation. And again, I'm trying to parse this carefully so that it doesn't conflict with what I see, but it also, I'm trying not to be too terribly offensive to anyone. Well, that may change. It may be actually possible to change so that you can physically generate, have progeny from the stance of a sex that you were not when you were born, however that ends up being handled. Now, obviously, if you end up somehow generating a 2Y chromosome creature, that's not going to survive, but the technology can get in the way and ensure that you're always providing an X chromosome. If you're the female, you maybe don't have as many choices. You only get one option, minus mutations and such. But if that's the case, does that change things? And that becomes a very, very interesting question there, because when the ideas of sex were first expressed as language until very, very recently, the equipment that you had and your genetic makeup were more or less always going to be in agreement. Whether or not you were capable of spawning progeny didn't affect that, though. So that's not really a consideration normally. But on the other hand, the knowledge of chromosomes was also not in consideration when these language terms were developed. So we're left in kind of this, I'm not sure where we should go with that. To me, it seems like the distinction between male and female is a sex-based distinction, which should be considered. And we may have some trouble spots in terms of how to navigate that when we're considering somebody who's going through, and I'm once again going to a sexual reassignment therapy, not gender, because quite simply, the hormones that you have are a physiological status, a physiological effect of a particular sex. And if you're trying to physically become more like that sex, you're going through a sexual transformation at some level or another. What you're becoming, if you're not fully able to convert over in some way, for example, if you can't reproduce, I'm not sure. That's, there's going to be problems with this no matter what. But when we're looking at that, if you are male or female, as the more or less almost entirely binary choice there, perhaps you can switch from one to the other. But that is a different kind of change than if you're changing from the male associated gender of, say, man, and the female associated gender of woe of man. Yeah, that's it's pretty strange to have the derivative, and it gives an immediate subjugation. I'm sure there's terms for it. You got your women with Y's and all of that. Yeah, but we know what the terms historically have been, and really we should try to stick with them to whatever extent we can until we come to some sort of strong agreement I don't think it's not going to make much sense to start using new words. And that's where I say, language is a social construct, but to some extent it has to be given some respect as well. You can't just bend that and start making new words up to reflect things that were directed previously without expecting turmoil and some, some strengthening of maybe negative perceptions that were already there as that's being pressed onto people. It may need to go there eventually. It may need to go there quicker. But you have to understand that when you start tinkering with the pure expression that people use, you're violating them in a certain way. Now, clearly, if you feel like you should be a she, and people are always calling you he, that's a violation on you as well. But that's something different, in a sense, because on one side we're looking at vast norms. Now those norms seem to be changing, and as they change, some people look at it as, oh, this is just sort of the popular thing to do. Everybody's saying they're trans or whatever, or queer or something else, just because it's sort of the in thing right now. I'm sure there are people who are. There's no way to look into every mind and be able to make any kind of broad distinction that way. But honestly, there's an extra burden to dealing with that. It might be worth it, for a few very narcissistic people to take that burden on because they get some little extra level of negative attention or something. But I think for the vast majority of people, there has to be something really driving them towards that, where they feel that they associate more with let's stick with the gender here, with that gender role, okay? And that's perfectly reasonable. We've always kind of had that. Before we had any kind of ability to physically change someone, physiologically change someone, to any degree reasonable, you could castrate or whatever, but it wasn't the same thing, right? Some similar effects. Before you had that, I know there was a woman living in one of the mining towns in the West back in the 1880s. I remember reading about her. Well, not a woman, a man who was female, and everybody knew that she was female, but she was allowed to vote as a man. She was allowed to own property as a man, and just his whole life, I guess, was entirely lived as a man. Took a wife, all kinds of things that would have been a problem maybe in other areas of the country, simply because, but where things are sparse and a little freer, it was just accepted, a useful member of the community is a useful member of the community. You don't have to get into all this craziness of trying to not accept people because they don't fit your standards perfectly. There are lots of people who don't fit your standards perfectly. Deal with it, But I guess I guess the real point to this for me is that I feel that there's something very wrong going on by the side of this discussion that tries to be more inclusive, etc., but that they seem completely blind to the distinction between sex and gender. Whenever I get in discussions, there seems to be almost no willingness to really draw that dividing line between these two things. That there is one and there is the other. And I don't know which one should drive our linguistics. I don't know, should personal pronouns be based on one, the other, neither? And right now we're in this chaotic state where some people want the personal pronoun of their gender to go with them. Some people want to use they or them, which is a little odd because that's the plural, but it does have a certain usage. Sometimes when there's an unknown person of an unknown person whose gender and sex is unknown at a distance, you might say they went and did this on a singular. And that's kind of where that derives from. It's not just that they're claiming multiple personalities or something like that. But like I said, that right now is in this kind of weird situation where there's no real agreement, even in terms of people who associate with very closely, or who claim to be a gender that does not match the sex they were born with. Now there are some other real world situations, like the bathroom dilemma. Oh my, this is one where you can kind of see the problem on all sides, right? If people don't believe, accept the gender that you've taken on, and are disturbed by you using the same restroom as them. Now, I don't know, I don't know what kind of social experience goes on in the restroom. For guys, it's pretty much, unless you're fucking pissed drunk, you're not going to chat with somebody else in the restroom, right? When you're drunk, yeah, maybe. But, for women, there's always been this, at least perception, and it's more than that, I know, of, women going off there and having their secret conversations about the guys at the table. The guys don't walk away and go to the men's room and while they're pissed and have a chat about what's going on. No. But if they're left alone, they might talk about more guyish stuff, so who knows. But yeah, the problem there, of course, is some people are going to be made uncomfortable because of how they perceive someone else using that restroom. In very much the same way as some people who are being perceived differently from how they believe they are is it makes them uncomfortable to go in what they see as the wrong restroom. So no matter what, you're going to have discomfort. You might have different feelings towards it. So, you have the ultra-conservatives with, well, I wouldn't want some dude in a tutu, with my little girls. Well, I don't really want some, and they're implying that it's like some pervert or something. I don't want some pervert with my little boys either, I mean, and honestly, I think the segmentation of the use of restrooms and other facilities based on either sex or gender is a little weird. It's not like, we've already gotten past that with something in terms of homosexuality, right? We're not like, oh, there's a gay guy, I don't want him in the men's room because he'll be like, fantasizing about what we're doing, pissing or taking a shower or whatever. Well, we got through that. Can't we get through this as well? And obviously, for the same reasons that homosexuals, you're basically left with two choices. Chase them out of the bathroom with a baseball bat, or learn to accept it and just say, well, they're probably not actually in here to get their jollies. They have to use the restroom. Well, If you apply the same thinking, and I'm sure the same ultra-conservatives feel pretty uncomfortable with an obviously gay guy in the bathroom often enough, well, if you apply that same thinking, you end up in a situation where you say, well, the obvious answer is let's not discriminate and have this separate but equal, and usually separate but not equal, to tell you the honest truth, restriction in terms of males and females using the bathrooms. However you want to distinguish them, by sex, by gender, whatever, it doesn't make a damn bit of difference. And it's kind of interesting because if you look at things the way I look at them, gender, and I consider myself to be without gender in the sense that I don't really give a shit about it. It means nothing to me, but anybody judging me probably would end up associating me as male, perhaps because I don't care about gender. No, seriously, I mean, you know, I do guy things in a lot of ways, right? And I don't even think about it, and some of that's just, you know, it's not a matter of it being natural or anything, it's just, but on the other hand, there's a lot of things that are associated with masculine, you know, in this society. I don't sit around and drink beer and watch football, you know. I don't, there's a lot of stuff. I'm not into fixing my own car. I'm not into all that stuff that's kind of like often associated with, these are the things guys like to do. I don't like going hunting or fishing or any of that shit. I do, you know, my main hobbies are fairly non-gender aligned. Now, wargaming, I always thought was pretty heavily aligned with males, and it is. You go to the con and you can see. But there are certainly females who are involved, because there are in fishing and watching football and everything else. So, I know some of my behaviors, some of my mannerisms and stuff have always come across as somewhat feminine. That's fine, you know. I mean, it's never been anything that I made any choices on or feel terribly, you know, I don't feel particularly like, oh, I should consider myself like 3% female and 47% male and 50% that. No, I just don't. I don't think of it at all. Honestly, what I think of myself is a little boy who seems to have gotten in an old body somehow. But yeah, like about 10 years old, and has some confusions around this whole puberty thing coming up, in a lot of ways, but you know, obviously though, each person has their own kind of view of who they are, and mine doesn't really suit. I mean, I don't expect that I'm allowed to play in the McDonald's Playland just because I think I'm kind of that young, and even though I might want to, as much as I did at that age. That's part of the problem, is it's kind of hard to say, oh, I think about myself as a 10-year-old boy. I think of myself as how I was at about 10 to 13, somewhere in that era, which is not the way any other boys I knew really were, but nor is it at all the way girls were. I'm off on my own little existence here all along, and it doesn't change, and that's kind of the difference. But yeah, here we go with making it all about me, right? So I think the struggle that we have is to kind of try to find those places where it makes the most sense, and if you slam too hard into it, for example, if you're saying something, okay, social construct, right? Gender's a social construct. If you're saying that, and then you're saying, oh no, I couldn't choose it, right? This isn't something I had any option on. That may be the case, right? I mean, how you're brought up might affect things heavily. A lot of different environmental factors. There might be genetic factors in play. There might be other things in play. It might be you got hit on the head at the wrong time, whatever. I mean, I don't know. There could be tons of things that could help you help align you with a particular gender role. But these are the same kind of things that might align you with a particular job. I would argue, and I know nobody wants this, that your sexual preferences are probably also of this nature. Not really chosen, but not a deterministic factor coming from your genetics either. Something that's a mixture of environmental influences. And for some, maybe there is a choice. Don't ever assume that just because most of you feel like you have no choice, some of you, that there is no possibility of people who are out there who actually do have an option. It's a complicated, messy existence, and you can't account for everything in your simple black and white terms of, well, there's no choice in this, or there is a choice. And notably, what I was saying, if you're in a society that had no gender distinctions, well then, there wouldn't be this question at all. You wouldn't have to select from one to the other. But we're in a society that has these, and to some extent, what I see is that, and this may be because they're on the extreme end of feeling associated with a given gender. What I see from the people who are transgendered is that they actually go very far in the direction of the gender that they associate with, as opposed to being closer to the midline for the most part. Which is to say, your average cisgendered person is actually probably closer to the middle, to that gender doesn't actually matter. And, whatever, that's some sort of privilege or something, great. And that people who feel like they maybe crossed the line just slightly find it easier to say, or just to agree with whatever gender roles are assigned to them. Now for me, I'm sure I take some of them on, there's no question of that, but there are plenty of others that I just don't really, I actually feel like, well, it sucks being male, because that just doesn't really mesh with how I am. So for example, being at all aggressive in making acquaintances, and certainly in any kind of sexual contact, no, that's not going to happen with me. I don't do that. Now, at least when I don't know the person. Now, when I know the person and I already know that there's acceptance, etc., I'm much more freed up and am willing to interject and try to push my own view a little bit, but it's not to the degree, I think, that many people will. Like, I don't know. There's just, I'm thinking even in the case of like trying to suggest a game to play, right? I very often hold back and don't want to make suggestions because I don't want to influence the decision too heavily. Sometimes I'm afraid that I will influence it. And what I've learned is it doesn't really make a difference even when I do push for things. They don't get played, so it doesn't really matter usually. But sometimes I get this feeling that like I'm railroading people into a decision, and that feels so wrong. And I totally don't want that to happen. And that kind of consideration, and it's not like, oh, I'm so better because I think about that. No, I don't really think about it. It's almost like a shackle in terms of what its effect is. It's not like, well, I'd really like to do this, but I'm not going to suggest it because I know so-and-so wants to. Nah, it's nothing like that. But something along those lines feels less on that sort of aggressive masculine side and more on the passive feminine side. For whatever you want to link those two, but whatever. And I drive more towards the latter there. And often to being unhappy with the circumstances that arise from that. But I might feel just as unhappy by pushing my view because I'll feel some sort of guilt for if things don't go right. I don't know. But yeah, we've kind of strayed a little bit. I guess, and that's pretty common for me. I guess what it comes down to is if it is a social construct, don't treat it like a physical necessity. Don't treat it like it's something that was just so predetermined that you had no possibility of decision points or anything like that. And in fact, I don't know. I mean, maybe I was forced into a situation where I'm very close to this middle ground where it's like, yeah, I mean, it doesn't really matter to me. I don't really, I just don't really see myself as comfortable, as particularly comfortable doing shit with the guys as doing shit with the girls. The big difference for me comes down to which, what activities are we talking about? If they're activities I like, I'm fine doing them either way. If they're activities I don't particularly like, I'm not going to enjoy it in either case. And of course, there's modifiers in there. If there's someone I really like being around, in any case, for any reason, that might change the flavor. But yeah, and it's not like I like needlepoint or anything, right? I mean, I like to cook, but that's not particularly associated. I don't know. I'm a slob. That's more a male thing, I guess, in a lot of views. But it's not overwhelmingly so. What things are? That's the question. Patterns of speech, maybe? This is who you are, patterns of speech, what clothing you wear, whether or not you put gunk on your face. I mean, come on, seriously? This is so key to your identity, to your existence. It's key to me to be able to express, and including in that expression, the right to dress in a way that, appeals to me. But I don't know, this is a totally different rant, but I should do a style rant. Maybe I already have. I've never understood this because you see people who dress more or less the same way every fucking day, like every time you see them. So an example, kind of biker type guy wears his leather jacket everywhere, always wears jeans and maybe a t-shirt. A lot of guys just wear jeans and a t-shirt all the time. Maybe it's what's comfortable for them. You never see them going off that very far unless there's some kind of special occasion, Oh yeah, I'll wear a tux, it's a wedding, or I'll dress nicely, business casual. But when it's my own time, my own choice, I always wear the same kind of thing. And that style becomes so ingrained into their existence almost, and it kind of fits with who they are and how they speak and how they act and everything like that. Whereas I've never felt linked in that kind of way, and that's the kind of thing that gender seems to be. It seems to be this kind of thing that I have really very little connection to, and instead but I don't consider myself anything, special or different because of not having a connection to my gender, or to a different gender. It's just the way things are. And again, that may be because I'm close enough to what is expected that there's not that much problem, although I certainly have gone through issues, when I'd wear a cape to grade school, I would get, that's disruptive, you can't come like this. Well, that's what I felt like wearing. If I'd worn a dress, it probably would have been the same way, right? It's just, there's a flair there that wants to be expressed sometimes, and then there's a certain sloppiness that wants to be expressed sometimes, and there's this desire to take on roles and all kind of shit like that. That's what makes me up. I'm not patterning myself to a single narrow band. I need that expanse because that's what I want to play in. You know what I mean? I want the capability to explore more of the state space in a lot of ways. And is that intrinsic to me? No. If I had to wear, more or less the same stuff, I could cope with it, but I would feel restrained by it, right? Well, how do people in the fucking military feel? They always have to wear this uniform. Obviously they have their off time, but they always have to wear this uniform while they're at work or whatever. And I've been in a situation where I had to wear a uniform at work as well. And it feels like, well, I'm not allowed to be me. I'm this tool. I'm this piece of interchangeable equipment in this huge machine. That's not how I associate myself, and therefore, unless I do associate with myself there, I'm feeling something very similar to being forced into the wrong gender in that case, I think. And if that's the case, well, shouldn't we be honoring the fact that not everybody feels comfortable wearing a uniform, and some people want to wear a cape? I don't know. And it's not just want to. They feel this drive to add something else, to be something else, to differ from this gray norm that is oppressing them. How is that different from feeling like, wow, I'm a woman in my mind, in my heart, that almost all the time, and maybe all the time, and yet if I go into work in a dress, everybody will be upset with me, and I'll get canned or whatever. Well, it's the same kind of thing to me, but I haven't experienced both sides of it. I've only experienced my own little weirdness, which, you crimp yourself, you fit yourself into the mold in order to get by. And it's great if we can loosen that and make some people more able to live as they want to be. But maybe we should be careful not to focus just on this gender aspect of it, but to focus in a more broad, more free, expressing yourself as you are. And I think, honestly, the younger folk today do a much better job of that in some ways. But then you start looking and you see, they all they still fit into their little patterns. It's just their little patterns are different. Their little patterns have changed a little bit. Shaving one side of a head or something, that kind of means something. That puts them in this clique and all that. Well, I don't want to be in any fucking clique. I want to be outside all of that. I want to be what I want to be when I want to be it. If my hair's blue, my hair's blue. If I shave my head, I shave my head. If I grow bushy beard and my hair is all wild, that's how it is. It just happens, It's how I feel. It's how I want to be. It's what I am. How is that different just because, and would it make a difference whether the fact that I'm changing in that way, or if I was always a dirty hippie, would that make me more acceptable in some way? I mean, it would, because I'd fit better into some clique or another. But it's what it almost feels like. When you're talking social construct, you're talking about things that we could restrain ourselves, almost certainly, and act differently, according to the patterns, according to the norms that are expected of us. Or we could choose not to. Now, to some extent it feels like we're making progress, but we're making progress on one little slim area where people want to be seen as something of their own understanding of themselves. I'm not even going to say, choosing isn't the right word there, right? I don't think it's a choice for me either. It's a drive to be whatever I am at any given moment. It just changes around so much. None of it ever really terribly related to gender, although sometimes there's an asexual component to it, I think, in the sense that I want to be somewhat more androgynous, but I never really see myself as female, except sometimes I can project, but that's something different. Anyway, I think we've babbled long enough. I've probably managed to insult and disturb people on all sides of the spectrums, but that's what we do, right?